First thing we're going to need is this report profile function that's coming from our report profile module. And if we dive into that, then we'll see we've got report profile takes the ID, phase, actual duration, base duration, start time, commit time, and interactions. And it pushes that as an object onto this queue. And then we have this interval right here that sends the profile queue every 5 seconds. So that if there are items in the queue, we take a queue to send, we reset our queue to empty, and then we send that queue to a backend. In our case, we're not actually sending it anywhere but the console, but this is where you'd actually make an HTTP call to send that queue to the backend, where you could store it in some time series database and then pull it up in some tool like Grafana or something like that so that you can monitor this data over time. So let's go ahead and use that report profile with our React profile component. So I'm going to want to profile this counter right here. And so I'm going to say React profiler. We'll put everything inside of that profiler, and then we'll have an ID to uniquely identify this specific profiler. We'll call this counter. And on render, we'll report the profile. And then let's just ditch that. We'll save this. And after 5 seconds, we're actually already going to get a report. Right there, sending profile queue. We have one object in this queue, and that is the ID of counter. So that's the profiler that is reporting. The phase is mount. So this is because this area of our component tree was actually mounted. And this is when that started. This is when it committed. And here's the actual duration and the base duration. Now the start time is when React began rendering this update. The actual duration is the time spent rendering the committed update, and the base duration is kind of the estimated time to render the entire subtree without memoization. So this can kind of give you an idea of some optimizations that you could potentially make here, and that's React's best guess for that. The commit time is when React actually committed the update, and that is relative to the start time. You can subtract those two and get an idea for that actual duration there. And then we'll play around with the interactions in our extra credit. So if we do an update now, we just click this. That's going to add another item to our render queue here that we send to the backend. And this time the phase is update. And here's when it started based on when we started the application. And here's our actual duration and the base duration here. And then of course we can do a bunch of updates here, and all of those will get sent to our backend all at once. And this is why we're sending it every 5 seconds rather than sending it immediately, because there can be a lot of re-renders in a typical application, and you wouldn't want to send a request for every single one individually. We'll just batch them and send them all together. So in review, what we did here was we took our report profile function that we had here, which is adding things to a queue, and we passed it along to the onRender method of our React profiler. We gave that an ID so we can uniquely identify it against any other React profiler components we have in our application. We wrapped this around the area of our application that we wanted to measure and monitor for production use. And then we started to observe these reports getting sent off to our backend.